The clock reads 2, 47 inches the morning above the Mediterranean, and the sky above Tel Aviv is on fire. Not the slow, controlled burn of a military exercise. Not the distant thud of intercepted rockets that Israelis have grown almost comfortable ignoring. This is something categorically different, something that the architects of Western air defense doctrine spent decades insisting could never happen. Something that the billion-dollar procurement budgets and the glossy defense industry brochures and the confident press briefings from Tel Aviv and Washington had collectively promised the world was impossible. Iran's Fattah, 2 hypersonic ballistic missiles, the weapons that Western analysts dismissed, downgraded, and quietly feared in equal measure, have just torn through the most heavily defended airspace on the planet. And in their wake, they have left something that no amount of official damage assessment language will be able to sanitize. Israel's most strategically critical air installation, the base housing, the F-35 Adir stealth fighters that represented the absolute pinnacle of the Israeli Air Force's deterrence capability, is burning. Not damaged, not degraded, burning. The hangars are gone. The aircraft inside them are wreckage. The radar arrays that were supposed to see everything coming detected almost nothing in time to matter. And offshore in the waters that American admirals had long considered their personal operational domain, something equally staggering is unfolding. The carrier strike groups that Washington deployed as a show of force, as a message to Tehran that American resolve was absolute and American reach was limitless, have begun moving, not toward the fight, away from it, repositioning, recalculating, retreating from a threat envelope that their own systems cannot reliably neutralize. In the span of a single night, 2 of the most aggressively marketed military mythologies of the modern era have been shattered simultaneously. The invincibility of Israeli air power, the permanence of American naval dominance, both exposed as constructs expensive, carefully maintained, but ultimately fragile constructs by a nation that the Western world spent 50 years trying to break through sanctions, through assassinations, through proxy pressure, and through the sustained denial of its right to exist as a sovereign actor on its own terms. This is Night 32, and what happened in the hours before dawn will be studied, debated, and reckoned with for decades. Before we dissect every layer of what unfolded, 3 questions that will drive everything that follows. First, how did the Fattah-2 penetrate the most expensive, most layered, most technologically advanced air defense architecture ever assembled over a single country? What specific characteristics of this weapon made every interception system from Iron Dome to Arrow 3 operationally irrelevant in the critical window? Second, what does the departure of American carrier groups from the Gulf of Oman actually mean in strategic terms? Is this a temporary tactical adjustment as the Pentagon will inevitably claim? Or is it a visible marker of a permanent shift in the geography of American military power projection? And third, when Israel's F-35s burn on the ground inside their own hangars, when the aircraft that were supposed to guarantee air superiority across the entire eastern Mediterranean are converted into twisted aluminum and melted avionics, what remains of the strategic deterrence architecture that Washington and Tel Aviv have jointly constructed and maintained since 1973? Those 3 questions, answered in full, beginning now. And before we go further, if this channel is giving you the kind of analysis that mainstream defense correspondents either cannot access or will not publish, subscribe, hit like, and drop your most unfiltered assessment in the comments. Your engagement is the reason this work continues at this level of depth and independence. This is the analysis that the major networks are not equipped to deliver. Because delivering it honestly requires saying things that make powerful governments uncomfortable. If that kind of unfiltered strategic assessment matters to you, subscribe to the Jiang report right now. Hit the notification bell and share this with anyone who is trying to understand what is genuinely happening in the Middle East beneath the official narrative. The community that is building around this channel is one of the sharpest and most engaged audiences covering these events anywhere. Be part of that conversation. The opening sequence nobody predicted. Every serious military analyst who has studied Iranian strike doctrine over the past decade understood that any major Iranian offensive operation would begin not with its most powerful weapons, but with its most intelligent ones. Tehran has consistently demonstrated a strategic sophistication that Western commentators consistently underestimate the ability to think several operational layers ahead of an adversary and to structure an attack sequence that degrades the enemy's capacity to respond before the decisive blow lands. What unfolded in the hours after midnight on Night 32 followed that doctrine with textbook precision and then exceeded it. The opening movement was electronic, not kinetic. Beginning approximately 90 minutes before the first physical strikes arrived over Israeli territory, Iran's Quds Force electronic warfare units activated a broad-spectrum jamming architecture that had been positioned across multiple vectors during the preceding 72 hours. The objective was not simply to blind Israeli radar temporarily. It was to generate a controlled confusion in which Israeli air defense operators would be simultaneously receiving contradictory data streams, some accurate, most fabricated, that their algorithms could not resolve into a coherent operational picture. Israeli Sultan radar arrays, which had been upgraded with American-supplied signal processing software following earlier engagement cycles, encountered something for which their update packages had not prepared them. Iranian electronic warfare teams deployed a technique that defense analysts are now calling frequency hopping deception, a method in which the jamming signal itself mimics the signature patterns of incoming hostile objects, before suddenly vanishing, forcing the tracking computer to commit defensive resources to a ghost, then recalibrate, then commit again. The result across 30 minutes of this activity was a systematic exhaustion of the computational bandwidth available for genuine threat assessment. By the time Iranian UAV formations, the low-cost, high-volume decoy swarms that have become Tehran's signature opening instrument crossed into Israeli airspace from the northeast, the air defense network was already operating at approximately 60% of its optimal capacity. Battery commanders were issuing interception orders against targets that did not exist. Tamir missiles were being expended against decoys traveling at subsonic speeds and carrying no warhead. The economics of that exchange, tens of thousands of dollars per interceptor against targets that cost Tehran a few $100s to produce and launch, were bleeding Israeli defensive depth at a rate no pre-conflict inventory assessment had adequately modeled. The Fattah-2 arrival, physics as a weapon. At 2:31 a.m. local time, the first confirmed Fattah-2 launch signatures were detected by American early warning satellite assets positioned over the Indian Ocean theater. The detection window, the interval between confirmed launch identification and projected impact, was 11 minutes. 11 minutes. For a target set that included active aircraft hangars, fueled and armed aircraft, and personnel in ready alert configuration. 11 minutes against a defense network already in partial overload from the preceding electronic and decoy campaign. The Fattah-2 is not simply a fast missile. Understanding why it defeated Israeli defenses requires understanding the specific technical architecture that makes it categorically different from every weapon system that Israeli and American air defense platforms were designed to. Neutralize. Conventional ballistic missiles follow a predictable re-entry arc. The physics of their trajectory, once the boost phase ends, are calculable. Modern air defense systems are optimized around this predictability. They track the incoming object, compute the projected terminal point, and position an interceptor on the convergent path. The system works. Against conventional ballistic missiles, under normal operating conditions, modern interception platforms achieve meaningful success rates. The Fattah-2 breaks the fundamental assumption on which this entire intercept logic is built. It's maneuvering re-entry vehicle technology, a guidance architecture that Iran has been quietly developing and refining since the late 2000s through a combination of domestic aerospace engineering and technology partnerships. Enables the warhead to execute high acceleration. Directional changes during terminal descent, not minor course corrections. Sharp, sudden, high-G maneuvers executed at velocities between Mach 12 and Mach 15. Changes in direction that impose forces on the airframe that would destroy conventional missile structures, forces that Iran's fourth-generation warhead casings have been specifically engineered to withstand. When the Fattah-2 enters terminal phase against a defended target, it is not flying a predictable path. It is executing an autonomous evasion sequence, a series of maneuvers programmed and updated by onboard systems that respond to the detected presence of interception radar locks. The interceptor missile pursuing it is chasing a target that changes direction faster than the interceptor can recalculate its own flight path. At Mach 15, the aerodynamic friction between missile surface and atmospheric molecules generates a plasma sheath, a layer of ionized gas enveloping the entire airframe. This plasma layer is, by its physical properties, partially opaque to the radar wavelengths that most interception guidance systems depend on for terminal tracking. The missile does not become invisible, but it becomes significantly harder to track with the precision required for a successful kinetic intercept. Arrow 3. The system specifically designed for this threat tier requires a clean radar picture for its guidance computer to execute a successful terminal intercept. A plasma-wrapped, actively maneuvering target moving at hypersonic velocity does not provide that picture. 3 Fattah-2 warheads impacted the Tel Aviv airbase complex within a 40-second window. The first struck the Eastern Hardened Aircraft Shelter Complex, the reinforced structures specifically designed to protect parked F-35 Adir aircraft from conventional munitions. The second impacted the main fueling and munitions preparation facility. The third landed on the primary runway intersection, creating a crater that rendered the main operational surface unusable for fixed-wing operations. The F-35s that never left the ground. The F-35 Adir, the Israeli modified variant of Lockheed Martin's 5th-generation stealth fighter, represents the single most expensive and strategically significant component of Israeli Air Force capability. Israel has integrated the Adir into every dimension of its strike planning: long-range deep penetration missions, suppression of enemy air defenses, intelligence collection, and the high-value target strike missions that form the core of Israeli deterrence doctrine. 17 F-35 Adir aircraft were parked in the Tel Aviv hardened shelter complex when the Fattah-2 struck. The hardened aircraft shelters, reinforced concrete structures built to protect aircraft from conventional munitions, were not designed with hypersonic impact physics in mind. The kinetic energy delivered by a warhead traveling at Mach 12 at the moment of impact is of a categorically different magnitude than the blast pressures that shelter designs have historically been engineered to withstand. The first warhead penetrated the shelter roof before detonating. The blast propagated laterally through the enclosed structure, destroying the aircraft inside, not through direct impact, but through the pressure wave and secondary fragmentation effects within a confined space. Combined with the detonation of the weapons loads that multiple aircraft were carrying in preparation for a planned retaliatory strike, the secondary explosions that followed the initial impact generated damage across an area significantly larger than the direct strike zone. By 3:15 a.m., Israeli Air Force ground personnel attempting to assess damage were working in conditions of complete operational chaos. Primary communications had been disrupted by the electronic warfare package that was still running. Secondary communications were functioning intermittently. The aircraft that had not been in the shelter complex, those on dispersal fields or at secondary bases, were being scrambled to safer locations. But without reliable command coordination, the scramble itself created additional risk and confusion. The strategic consequence of what occurred at Tel Aviv in those 40 seconds was not merely the physical destruction of specific aircraft, it was the severing of Israel's offensive strike capacity at precisely the moment when the IDF command structure would need that capacity most urgently. You cannot mount a retaliatory strike against Iran with aircraft that are on fire inside their own hangars. Nevatim and the intelligence strike. While Tel Aviv absorbed the primary kinetic assault, a coordinated parallel strike package targeted Nevatim Air Base, home to Israel's additional F-35 squadron, and, more critically, the location of key command and control infrastructure for Israeli Air Force long-range strike operations. The targeting of Nevatim demonstrated a level of intelligence preparation that Israeli military planners have found deeply unsettling in the post-strike analysis. The specific impact coordinates of the Nevatim strike suggest that Iranian targeting systems possessed granular knowledge of infrastructure placement within the base knowledge that would require either sustained human intelligence collection, highly capable satellite reconnaissance, or both operating in combination over an extended period. Unit 8200, the Israeli Signals Intelligence Directorate, whose work undergirds Israeli understanding of Iranian military communications, also sustained meaningful damage in this strike sequence. The targeting of 8,200 infrastructure was not incidental. Iran understands that Israeli intelligence collection capability is a force multiplier that extends Israeli military reach far beyond what organic Israeli surveillance assets could achieve alone. Degrading that capability was a strategic priority, not an afterthought. The combined effect of the Tel Aviv and Nevatim strikes within a single operational window produced something that the Israeli military has not experienced in its modern history: a genuine degradation of its ability to project offensive air power. This is not a temporary disruption. Rebuilding the destroyed aircraft inventory, repairing the physical infrastructure, and restoring the command and intelligence architecture that was targeted will take months, potentially longer. In the immediate operational window following the strikes, Israel found itself in the strategically unprecedented position of being unable to mount a meaningful conventional air response against Iranian territory. The weapon that was supposed to guarantee Israeli air dominance was burning on the ground, and the ally that was supposed to backstop Israeli capability was, at that precise moment, sailing away. What Western intelligence got wrong? The Western intelligence community's assessment of Iranian ballistic missile capability has followed a consistent pattern across the past 2 decades. Acknowledge the quantitative growth of Iran's missile inventory while systematically undervaluing its qualitative advancement. This pattern reflects a structural bias, the assumption that a sanctioned, isolated economy cannot produce cutting-edge aerospace engineering without access to Western supply chains, Western educational institutions, and Western research infrastructure. That assumption was wrong. Comprehensively, demonstrably, and consequentially wrong. Iran's missile development program traces its origins to the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, a conflict in which Iran endured ballistic missile attacks on its cities while possessing almost no equivalent retaliatory capability. The lesson absorbed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from that experience was categorical and permanent. Strategic vulnerability is the direct consequence of technological dependence. A nation that cannot manufacture its own deterrence instruments will always be at the mercy of those who can. From that foundational lesson, Iran built an aerospace industrial complex that has now produced the weapon that burned Israel's F-35s in their hangars. The engineering breakthrough, MARV technology. The maneuvering re-entry vehicle technology embedded in the Fattah-2 represents the culmination of approximately 15 years of focused development work conducted by IRGC Aerospace Force engineers operating under conditions of intense international pressure. The development was not linear. It suffered setbacks. Iranian engineers, whose work was progressing most rapidly, became targets of assassination operations, a backhanded acknowledgement from their adversaries that the work was genuinely threatening. The core engineering challenge in developing MARV capability is the marriage of 2 competing requirements. Hypersonic velocities generate enormous aerodynamic and thermal loads on any airframe. The heat generated by atmospheric friction at Mach 12 and above is sufficient to melt conventional structural materials and destroy conventional electronic components. Building a warhead that can survive those conditions while simultaneously executing precise directional maneuvers requires materials, science, thermal management, engineering, and guidance system miniaturization that are genuinely at the frontier of what is currently achievable in aerospace engineering. Iran solved this problem through a combination of domestic materials, research, and strategic partnerships that allowed it to access knowledge without accessing the specific components that sanctions regimes were designed to interdict. The titanium ceramic composite heat shielding that protects the Fattah-2 warhead during terminal phase descent was developed in Iranian university research programs operating under military direction. The miniaturized inertial navigation units that provide the warhead with its autonomous maneuvering capability were produced in facilities that Western intelligence services spent years trying to locate and disrupt. The navigation independence factor. Perhaps the single most strategically significant characteristic of the Fattah-2 is one that receives less attention than its speed or its maneuverability. It is the weapon's complete independence from any navigation infrastructure that the United States or its allies control. Previous generations of precision-guided weapons, including earlier Iranian systems, incorporated GPS-assisted navigation as a component of their terminal guidance architecture. GPS dependency is a vulnerability. The United States controls GPS signal availability and accuracy on a regional basis and can degrade or deny GPS service in specific geographic areas during military operations. This capability has historically been factored into American and Israeli contingency planning as a tool for degrading adversary precision strike capacity. The Fattah-2 does not use GPS. Its navigation architecture is built on a combination of inertial measurement units which track position through internal acceleration measurements and require no external signal, and a terrain-matching guidance system for terminal phase that compares downward-looking sensor data against pre-loaded terrain maps. The system can also incorporate satellite navigation signals from Russia's GLONASS network or China's Beidou system as a supplementary accuracy layer, but it does not depend on them. In the complete absence of any external navigation signal, the Fattah-2 can hit a target the size of an aircraft hangar from a launch point 500 kilometers away. When American electronic warfare assets in the region activated GPS denial protocols in the opening phase of last night's engagement, a standard early-stage response to Iranian missile launch detection, Fattah-2 guidance systems did not register the denial. They were not listening for GPS. They were navigating on their own. The countermeasure that American planners had confidence in produced no operational effect against the weapon it was intended to disrupt. The cost asymmetry that makes defense impossible. There is an economic dimension to what occurred last night that deserves explicit attention because it illuminates why the current trajectory of this conflict is fundamentally unsustainable for the Israeli-American alliance in a way that military analysis alone does not fully capture. An Arrow 3 interceptor missile, the system specifically designed and procured to defeat the Fattah-2 threat tier, costs approximately $3.5 million per unit. An Iron Dome Tamir interceptor costs approximately $50,000. A David Sling interceptor costs approximately $1 million. An Iranian Fattah-2 hypersonic ballistic missile costs, by the best available estimates, between $800,000 and $1.2 million to produce at current IRGC manufacturing scale. Iran has invested heavily in manufacturing capacity, not in individual expensive platforms, but in the industrial infrastructure to produce large quantities of effective weapons at manageable cost. The exchange ratio implicit in last night's engagement is deeply unfavorable for the defending side. Iran expended weapons that cost, in total, a fraction of the value of the assets destroyed. Israel expended every interceptor it launched, and the interceptors that succeeded, if any, were more expensive than the decoys they destroyed. The interceptors that failed against the Fattah-2 warheads were destroyed at a cost to Israel that exceeded the cost to Iran of the missiles that defeated them. This is not a temporary tactical situation, and it is a structural economic reality that does not improve for the defending side as the conflict extends. Iran can sustain production. Israel cannot indefinitely replace destroyed F-35s, each of which carries a unit cost of approximately $110 million through any purchasing timeline that the conflict's operational tempo will accommodate. What self-reliance actually means in 2024? The Fattah-2's existence is proof of something that Western policymakers have consistently refused to accept as a general principle. Sufficiently determined nations, given sufficient time, will develop around technology denial regimes. Sanctions can slow development. They cannot permanently prevent it when the national will to achieve capability is genuine and the engineering talent exists. Iran's aerospace engineering community is drawing on a talent pool built over 40 years of domestically oriented university education. Iranian universities graduate thousands of engineers annually in fields relevant to missile development materials, science, aerodynamics, electronics engineering, propulsion physics. The sanctions regime that was supposed to prevent Iran from accessing the components for advanced weapons instead created the incentive structure that caused Iran to develop the domestic capability to make those components itself. The Fattah-2 contains no American components, no European components, no Japanese components. Every element of its production chain, from the solid propellant manufacturing to the electronic guidance assemblies to the precision machining of the airframe, is executed inside Iran by Iranian engineers using Iranian industrial capacity. This is not a claim that Tehran makes for propaganda purposes. It is a verifiable manufacturing reality that Western defense procurement analysts have been quietly documenting for several years, while their governments continue to insist that the sanctions architecture was working. It was not working. The evidence of that failure is currently distributed across the wreckage of Tel Aviv Air Base. The decision no admiral wanted to make. At approximately 4:20 a.m. Gulf Standard Time, the commander of Carrier Strike Group 12, operating from the flag bridge of the USS Gerald R, Ford received a threat assessment update from the Theater Intelligence Fusion Cell that caused a fundamental recalculation of the strike group's tactical situation. The assessment detailed the following. Iranian coastal defense forces had activated the full complement of their anti-ship ballistic missile batteries along the Gulf of Oman coastline and on multiple island positions within the Strait of Hormuz approach corridor. Satellite reconnaissance had confirmed the repositioning of Khalij Far's anti-ship ballistic missile systems, weapons specifically designed and tested against large surface targets to forward launch positions with clear line of sight to the carrier group's current operating area. Additionally, Iranian submarine assets, the Adir-class midget submarines and the larger Fattah class, had been detected leaving their home ports in the preceding 12 hours, with current positions unknown. Unknown submarine positions in a confined, shallow water environment with degraded sonar performance due to active Iranian acoustic countermeasure deployment is, in naval operational terms, one of the most dangerous situations a carrier strike group can occupy. Carriers are not designed for this threat environment. They are designed for open ocean operations where their escort destroyers and frigates can maintain sonar coverage, where their air wings can operate at range, and where the geometry of threat vectors is manageable. In the confined, cluttered, electronically contested waters of the Gulf of Oman, under current conditions, the strike group's defensive advantages were significantly degraded. The admiral made the call. The strike group would reposition to a safer operating distance eastward, toward the broader waters of the Indian Ocean, while the threat picture clarified. The second carrier strike group operating in the region, built around the USS Abraham Lincoln, was simultaneously receiving comparable assessments and executing a comparable movement. What the Pentagon called it and what it was. Within hours, the Pentagon's communications apparatus was describing the movement of both carrier strike groups as a repositioning to optimize operational flexibility. This is the language that bureaucratic institutions reach for when they need to describe a retreat without using the word retreat. The operational reality is considerably less ambiguous. Both strike groups accelerated their departure from the Gulf of Oman. Speed of movement, not direction of movement, is the clearest indicator of the urgency with which a decision is being implemented. Ships that are optimizing operational flexibility do not significantly increase their transit speed. Ships that are getting outside a threat envelope as quickly as safely possible do. Satellite commercial imagery, captured by multiple independent services during the relevant time window, shows both carrier groups at speeds inconsistent with leisurely repositioning. The imagery also shows the simultaneous activation of the most intensive electronic countermeasures configurations, chaff deployment, active jamming, and the full combat power operation of the Aegis fire control systems, consistent with commanders who believed they were operating in an active threat environment, not conducting a tactical exercise. Why this matters more than the media is reporting. The departure of American carrier strike groups from the Gulf of Oman during an active engagement is not in isolation a catastrophic military event. Carriers are enormously valuable assets, and the decision to reposition them out of a threat envelope is a rational operational judgment, not an act of cowardice. The military logic of the decision, taken in isolation, is defensible. What is not defensible, and what the departure reveals in terms of the broader strategic landscape, is the implicit message it sends to every party watching this conflict. For Israel, the departure communicates something that no American official will state explicitly. In a conflict scenario where the cost of direct intervention exceeds a threshold that American military commanders consider acceptable, the carrier strike groups that Israel has historically relied upon as the ultimate backstop for its security guarantees will not be present in the theater. The commitment to Israeli security that Washington has repeated at every diplomatic occasion for decades is genuine in its political expression. It is conditional in its military application. For Iran, the departure validates a doctrine of deterrence that Tehran has been investing in and refining for 15 years. The anti-access area denial architecture, the layered combination of anti-ship ballistic missiles, coastal defense cruise missiles, fast attack craft swarms, mine-laying capability, and submarine forces was designed for precisely this purpose. Not to sink carriers necessarily, to make the cost-benefit calculation of operating carriers in the Gulf so unfavorable that American commanders would choose to operate at distance. That is exactly what has now occurred. For every other regional actor watching this conflict, the Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, the departure, recalibrates every security calculation that has been built on the assumption of American military permanence in the region. The assumption was not unreasonable. American forces have maintained continuous presence in the Gulf for over 3 decades. But continuity of presence and continuity of engagement in active high-risk scenarios are different commitments. Last night clarified which kind of commitment American military posture actually represents when tested. The electronic warfare dimension. The repositioning of American carrier forces was not driven solely by the anti-ship missile threat. Electronic warfare played a significant enabling role in Tehran's operational success that deserves explicit analysis. Iranian electronic warfare capability has advanced substantially over the past decade through a combination of domestic development and the operational lessons absorbed from observing and, in several documented cases, capturing American unmanned systems operating in the region. The RQ-170 Sentinel capture in 2011, which Iran achieved through a GPS spoofing operation that caused the aircraft to land at an Iranian airfield, believing it was landing at its home base, demonstrated Iranian capability in GPS manipulation that has since been substantially extended. During last night's engagement, Iranian electronic warfare assets executed a sustained operation targeting the communications and data link architecture of American naval forces in the region. The Cooperative Engagement Capability Network, the system that allows American surface combatants to share radar tracking data and coordinate their defensive fires, experienced significant interference during the critical window of Iranian missile launches. This interference did not prevent the system from functioning entirely, but it introduced latency and data corruption into the network that degraded the speed and accuracy of the collective threat response. In air defense operations, where decisions must be made in seconds, where the window between detection and intercept is measured in single-digit minutes against a hypersonic target degradation of the data link network, is not a minor inconvenience. It is a potentially decisive operational factor. The seconds that commanders and systems lost to corrupted data during the Iranian strike sequence may represent the difference between interception attempts that had a chance of success and interception attempts that were launched too late to matter. The civilizational weight behind the trigger. To understand why Iran's military forces operate with the characteristics they consistently demonstrate: precision under pressure, willingness to accept cost, institutional cohesion in the face of existential threat, it is necessary to understand something that purely technical military analysis systematically fails to capture. It is necessary to understand what Iranian soldiers believe they are fighting for and why that belief generates a quality of operational commitment that no defense budget can manufacture. Iran is not a nation-state in the conventional post-Westphalian sense. It is a civilization that has existed as a continuous political and cultural entity for over 2 millennia, predating the United States by more than 2,400 years, predating the modern state of Israel by approximately the same margin, and predating the British Empire, whose decisions continue to shape the Middle East by enough centuries to make the comparison almost absurd. This civilizational depth is not merely a historical curiosity. It has direct operational consequences. Iranian soldiers who man the Fattah-2 launch systems are not operating purely within a framework of political ideology or religious obligation, though both of those dimensions are real and present. They are operating within a framework of national identity that stretches back through the Persian Empire, through the Achaemenid and Sassanid dynasties, through the Islamic Golden Age, in which Persian intellectual culture sat at the center of human scientific and philosophical advancement. When the United States imposes sanctions that are designed to prevent Iran from feeding its children and heating its homes, it is not dealing with a government that can simply be pressured into compliance. It is dealing with a civilization that has outlasted every empire that ever attempted to subjugate it: the Macedonians, the Romans, the Mongols, the British, and that carries within its national psychology a foundational communication that external domination is not permanent, that resistance is not futile, and that the price of submission is higher than the price of struggle. The asymmetry of motivation. There is a profound asymmetry of motivation between the parties to this conflict that receives almost no serious treatment in Western strategic analysis. It is, however, one of the most important factors determining the conflict's trajectory. American soldiers deployed to the Middle East are professionals executing orders within a framework of institutional duty. They are skilled, disciplined, and frequently courageous. But they are fighting, at the most fundamental level, for a policy, a set of strategic interests that their government has determined require military enforcement. Policy can change. Interests can be recalculated. The American domestic political environment, which ultimately constrains what any American administration can sustain in terms of military engagement, responds to a democratic process in which sustained casualties for unclear objectives have historically produced political costs that force policy revision. Iranian IRGC personnel defending their country from an attack on its nuclear infrastructure, which the Iranian government has described not as a weapons program, but as a sovereign right, are operating within a different motivational structure entirely. They are defending their homeland. They are defending their families. They are defending the physical territory in which their civilization's deepest historical and cultural roots are embedded. The motivation to fight under those conditions does not respond to the same cost-benefit calculus that constrains democratic governments managing expeditionary military commitments. This asymmetry means that in a sustained conflict scenario, the will to continue fighting will deplete faster on the side that is fighting for policy than on the side that is fighting for survival. This is not a new observation. It is the central lesson of every asymmetric conflict of the 20th century, from Vietnam to Afghanistan to the Lebanese Civil War. But it is a lesson that Western strategic culture has demonstrated remarkable resistance to absorbing. What borrowed power cannot provide, Israel's strategic situation illuminates the will factor from the opposite direction. Israel has genuine indigenous military capability, its engineering talent is real, its soldiers are professionally trained, its tactical doctrine is sophisticated, but its strategic posture at the highest level is built on a foundation of dependence on American weapons transfers, American diplomatic protection, and American military backstop that creates a structural vulnerability that no amount of domestic military investment can fully overcome. The fundamental problem with borrowed power is that it is available only on the lender's terms. Washington lends its military and diplomatic power to Tel Aviv in exchange for Tel Aviv's function as a strategic partner in a region where Washington has broad interests. That partnership is genuine, but it is not unconditional. And when the cost of honoring it rises to the level of genuine risk to American strategic assets, as it did last night when carrier groups were facing anti-ship ballistic missile threats in a confined operating environment, American decision-makers will prioritize the preservation of American capability over the fulfillment of partnership commitments. This is not a betrayal. It is the normal operation of great power politics. But for Israel, in the middle of the night, when its air bases are burning and its air force cannot respond, and it looks offshore for the carrier groups that were supposed to be there, the normal operation of great power politics feels exactly like abandonment. The end of unipolar Middle East management. The Middle East that existed on the morning before Night 32, a region organized around American military primacy, Israeli air dominance, and the manageable containment of Iranian power no longer exists in the same form. The events of a single operational night have not created a new order, but they have conclusively terminated the operating assumptions of the old one. American military primacy in the region was never absolute, but it was sufficiently credible that most regional actors calibrated their behavior around it. The Gulf states maintained security partnerships with Washington, partly because American military presence provided real deterrence value. The Abraham Accords normalization process between Israel and several Arab states was underpinned by the shared assumption that American military commitment to Israeli security was durable and reliable. The entire regional security architecture of the past 30 years was built on foundations that last night's events have now subjected to serious structural stress. The withdrawal of carrier strike groups from the Gulf of Oman did not occur in a vacuum. It occurred while multiple regional governments, their intelligence services, actively monitoring the situation were watching. Every Gulf state capital has drawn its own conclusions from what it observed. Every government that signed onto the Abraham Accords framework is now conducting a new assessment of what that framework is actually worth. Every regional actor that had calibrated its behavior around the assumption of American military permanence is recalibrating. The multipolar architecture crystallizing in real time. What is replacing the old order is not yet fully formed. The process of structural transition in international systems is always longer and more uncertain than the dramatic events that initiate it suggest. But the broad outlines of the emerging architecture are visible. Russia and China, both of which have maintained strategic relationships with Iran through the years of Western pressure, are positioned to play a significantly expanded role in a Middle East that can no longer be managed by Washington alone. Russia's military technical cooperation with Iran has been an open secret for years. The navigation independence of the Fattah-2, achieved partly through integration with GLONASS satellite infrastructure, is one visible expression of that cooperation. China's economic relationship with Iran, maintained through the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership signed in 2021, provides Tehran with the commercial connectivity that sanctions were designed to deny. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which Iran formally joined in 2023, represents the institutional framework within which Tehran is gradually integrating itself into an alternative international architecture. This is not an anti-Western military alliance. It is a Eurasian economic and security cooperation framework that reduces the coercive leverage available to Western-dominated institutions. Iran inside the SCO is significantly more difficult to economically isolate than Iran outside it. For regional states watching this transition, Turkey, Qatar, Iraq, and others that have maintained relationships with multiple power centers, the emerging multipolar architecture offers options that the unipolar framework did not. The ability to balance between competing great powers, to extract value from multiple relationships simultaneously, and to avoid the binary choices that American pressure has historically imposed, represents genuine strategic liberation. Whether those states use that liberation wisely will depend on their own leadership quality and strategic judgment. But the space for independent action has expanded. The Abraham Accords under pressure. The normalization framework that the Trump administration engineered between Israel and several Arab states rested on a set of security assumptions that the events of Night 32 have significantly complicated. The implicit bargain of the Abraham Accords was straightforward. Arab states that normalized with Israel received enhanced American security guarantees, access to advanced American weapons systems, and the strategic benefit of alignment with the winning side of the regional balance of power. That bargain assumed Israeli military invincibility, or at least overwhelming superiority. It assumed American military commitment was unconditional and rapid, and it assumed Iranian power was manageable within the existing framework. Last night challenged all three assumptions simultaneously. Israeli air power was not invincible. It was grounded, literally, by Iranian precision strikes. American military commitment was not unconditional. It was recalculated and repositioned when the cost threshold was exceeded. And Iranian power was not manageable within the existing framework. It demonstrated the capability and the willingness to fundamentally disrupt it. Arab governments that have signed normalization agreements with Israel are not about to publicly repudiate them, but the internal political calculations are shifting. Populations in these countries, which never supported normalization in the way their governments did, are watching Israel's military embarrassment with emotions that their governments cannot entirely ignore. And strategic planners in Abu Dhabi and Riyadh and Rabat are conducting sober reassessments of the security value of alignment with a party whose principal military backer just repositioned its carriers away from the fight. Tehran's post-strike strategic position. Iran emerges from Night 32 having demonstrated several things simultaneously that collectively reshape its position in the regional and global order. It has demonstrated that its military capability is genuine, domestically sourced, and sufficiently advanced to penetrate the most sophisticated air defense architecture in the region. This changes how every neighboring government thinks about the cost of confronting Iran. It has demonstrated that its deterrence posture is credible, that red lines, when crossed, produce consequences proportionate to the crossing. This changes how Washington calculates the risk threshold of operations in the region. It has demonstrated that its national will is durable, that decades of sanctions, assassinations, and diplomatic isolation have not broken the organizational coherence or the motivational depth of its military institutions. This changes how potential adversaries model Iranian behavior in future scenarios. And it has demonstrated, through the navigation, independence, and manufacturing self-sufficiency of the Fattah-2, that the Western assumption that technological superiority is permanently monopolizable by well-funded Western powers is simply false. This changes how every developing nation assesses its own path to strategic autonomy. Iran is not a superpower. It does not have the economic depth, the global institutional influence, or the power projection capacity of the United States. But it has demonstrated that a mid-sized regional power with genuine industrial self-sufficiency, authentic national will, and the strategic patience to build capability over decades can impose costs on even the most powerful military alliance in history that caused that alliance to recalculate its commitments. That demonstration is itself a form of power, a soft power of example that resonates across every capital in the developing world, where leaders are trying to navigate a path to genuine sovereignty in a world that has historically been organized to prevent it. The wreckage at Tel Aviv is still hot. The carrier strike groups are still moving. The damage assessments are still being compiled in underground command centers in Tel Aviv and in classified briefing rooms at the Pentagon. Night 32 is not over in its consequences. Those will be playing out across weeks and months and years that none of us can fully see from where we stand tonight. But certain things are already clear. Clear enough to state without qualification and without the hedging that passes for analytical caution in mainstream coverage. The Fattah-2 is real. Its capability is not overstated. It defeated the best air defense systems that 50 years of American military technology and Israeli military adaptation could produce, not through luck, not through overwhelming numbers, but through genuine engineering and tactical intelligence. Any strategic assessment that does not begin by acknowledging that reality is not an honest assessment. American military commitment to the Middle East is conditional. The conditions are determined by American interests, as calculated by American military commanders in real time. That conditionality is not a moral failing. It is how great powers operate. But every partner and every adversary of Washington in this region needs to update their models to reflect it. Israel's strategic posture, built on borrowed power, premium technology, and the assumption of permanent American backstop, has been revealed as structurally insufficient for the threat environment that now exists. What Israel does with that revelation will determine whether the events of Night 32 become a catalyst for genuine strategic recalibration or a waypoint on a trajectory towards something far worse. And Iran, whatever your view of its government, its ideology, or its methods, has demonstrated something that deserves honest acknowledgement. The capacity of a besieged, sanctioned, pressured nation to build genuine military capability through indigenous development and national will is one of the most significant strategic facts of the 21st century. Understanding how that happened is not optional for anyone who wants to understand where this conflict goes next. The question I want to leave you with, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments, is this. After Night 32, after the F-35s burning at Tel Aviv, after the carriers repositioning toward the Indian Ocean, after the Fattah-2 has shown the world what it can do, is there a diplomatic path that any of the parties to this conflict can actually walk? Or have the events of the past 32 nights moved this confrontation beyond the reach of the frameworks that diplomacy depends on? Leave your most honest answer below. This conversation is one of the most important ones happening anywhere right now, and the quality of thinking in this community is consistently the best I encounter on this subject. If this analysis gave you something that you couldn't find anywhere else, share it. The people who need to see this kind of work are not always the ones who find it first. Hit like, subscribe to the Jiang report if you haven't already, and stay sharp. The next briefing will be soon. The situation is moving fast, and we will be here following every development, cutting through every official narrative, and delivering the clearest picture we can of what is actually happening in one of the most consequential conflicts of our era. Until then, stay informed, stay independent, and stay ahead of the story. This is Professor Jiang Shui Qin, and this is the Jiang Report.